Imagine a young man standing in a messy studio wearing a Giorgio Armani suit. It's the early 1980s. This isn't just clothing. It's a four-figure suit of armor, a symbol of peak Italian luxury. But he isn't careful with it. In fact, he's working himself into a state of visible distress. He's lashing out at a canvas with sticks of oil paint. The expensive silk is being splattered with black, red, and yellow. He's ruining the very thing the world says we should value. But to Jean-Michel Basquiat, the suit covered in paint is a statement. He was a man who looked like a Bowery bum and a fashion model at the same time. An artist who was crowned by the elite. Yet he lived in constant fear of being their mascot. There's a narrative that he was just a product of 80s hype. A featherweight who got lucky. But if you look past the neon-lit surface of the celebrity, if you actually decode the frantic, crossed-out language on the canvas, you realize that the radiant child wasn't just a lucky kid from the streets. He was a conceptual insurgent. He saw the world's cracks before anyone else did. Yes, he was really that good. But to understand why he had to crown himself, we need to go back. Before the $110 million auctions. Before the limousines, back to when he was just a ghost on the walls of Manhattan.
You know, a lot of us would talk about it. Who's SAMO? Have you ever met SAMO? It's an old woman.
To understand the disruptor, you have to look past the street urchin myth. The reality is more complex and far more interesting. Jean-Michel Basquiat wasn't born in a gutter. He was the son of a Brooklyn accountant. He was a middle-class polyglot. He spoke 3 languages before most kids could drive. But his life shifted on a single afternoon in 1968. A car struck 7-year-old Jean-Michel while he was playing. It resulted in a long, lonely stay in a hospital bed. To keep him occupied, his mother gave him a copy of Gray's Anatomy. Most kids get comic books. Basquiat got a medical map of the human interior. He became obsessed with what lay beneath the skin, the skulls, the organs, the hidden structures. It was his first lesson in looking deeper than the surface. By his teenage years, that stability was gone. His mother was institutionalized, his home life fractured, and Basquiat hit the pavement. This is where the romantic poverty begins. He wasn't just a runaway. He was a conceptual poet with a can of spray paint. Alongside Al Diaz, he created SAMO, short for same old shit. This wasn't just graffiti, it was a brand. He even mockingly put the copyright symbol on it. And he was writing manifestos on the walls of Soho, right where the art elite walked to their galleries. SAMO as an end to the 9 to 5. SAMO as an alternative to God. SAMO 4, the so-called avant-garde. He was a ghost in the machine, mocking the very industry he intended to conquer. He lived as a transient, sleeping on park benches, selling hand-painted postcards for a few dollars. He was hungry, he was unhoused, and he was working with an intensity that bordered on mania. By 1980, the partnership with Al Diaz dissolved. Basquiat scrawled a final message across the city. SAMO is dead. The brand was gone, but the man was just getting started. In 1981, the art world was a rigid, sterile place. Until a show called New York/New Wave changed everything. The work of a 20-year-old Basquiat stood out like a lightning bolt. It was raw. It was vibrating. It was loud. This was the moment the radiant child was born. Dealer Anina Nosei saw the potential for large-scale masterpieces. But there was a catch. He didn't have a studio, so she gave him the basement of her gallery. To some, it was a launch pad. To others, it was a sweatshop. He worked in a fever. He produced 20 paintings in 3 weeks. Nosei would often sell the canvases while the paint was still wet. Imagine the scene. A young man, trapped in a basement, fueling his internal distress into a production line for the elite. He was commanding the canvas, yes, but he was also being boxed in. This is where his visual language fully formed. He began painting the crown. It's his most famous symbol. But it wasn't just a cool tag. It was an act of intellectual authority. He was crowning his heroes. Jazz musicians like Charlie Parker, boxers like Joe Louis. He was taking black men who had been marginalized by history, and he was placing them on thrones. Then there were the skulls. These weren't just about death. They were the X-rays from his childhood hospital bed. He was peeling back the skin to show the universal humanity underneath, unmasking the racial structures of America. By 1982, Basquiat was a global phenomenon. He went from stealing bread to drinking Cristal champagne. It was a Hollywood miracle, but the air at the top was getting thin.
The next person I wrote about had to be totally unknown, had to be terribly young, very ambitious. I wanted to latch on to a career that I could watch and write about for a long time, like I had with Julian Schnabel.
Enter Andy Warhol. The old guard and the fringe finally collided. It was a high-stakes art world marriage. Warhol was the aging king of pop, looking for a new spark. Basquiat was the young firebrand, looking for a father figure. They were an inseparable duo. But underneath, the celebrity bromance, the friction was boiling. The media began to sharpen its knives. Critics called Basquiat Warhol's mascot. They used words like primitive. They looked at a genius and saw a pet. This is where the crisis of identity really takes hold. Basquiat worked himself into a state of paranoia. He was terrified of being tokenized. He wanted to be a star, not a gallery mascot. To fight back, he doubled down on his coded language. This is when his use of text became truly disruptive. He would write a word and then immediately cross it out. He said, "I cross out words so you will see them more." By obscuring the text, he forced the viewer to actually work. It was a metaphor for the erasure of black history. The things society tries to hide are often the most important. But the fame machine didn't care about metaphors. It only cared about the radiant child as a brand. He was selling paintings for $20,000. He was trapped in a buzzsaw of promotion and greed. He was wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, but he was losing his grip on who he actually was. He was a king in an Armani suit. Realizing that the crown he fought for was starting to feel a lot more like a crown of thorns.
One had the words man dies, all the way through it. It was very scary, and he was like looking really bad, and he had the splotches on his face, and he did not look good.
In 1987, the anchor was cut. Andy Warhol died unexpectedly. For Basquiat, this wasn't just the loss of a collaborator. It was the loss of his only true peer. The critical stings and the isolation suddenly had nowhere to go. He began to withdraw into the shadows. He worked himself into a state of suffocating paranoia. He would refuse to answer the door for his closest friends. He felt the world was no longer waiting for his next masterpiece. He felt they were waiting for his collapse. His heroin use became a desperate survival tactic. It was the only thing that could quiet the noise. He tried to find a reset. He travelled to the Ivory Coast, seeking a connection to the griot storytellers. But you can't run away from a crisis that lives inside your own mind. He returned to New York. His work took on a haunting, skeletal finality. His painting Riding with Death shows a skeleton horse. The vibrant colours were gone. The frantic text was silenced. On August 12th, 1988, the radiant child was found still. He died of an overdose at just 27 years old. The crown had finally become too heavy to wear. Death, in the art world, is often a cynical career move. The moment he was gone, The critics went quiet. The industry that had exhausted him now began to canonize him. But the real proof of his genius isn't in the auction catalogues. It's in the fact that his work still vibrates today. In 2017, a skull painting from 1982 went to auction. The gavel hit at $110 million. It was a record for an American artist. It's the ultimate irony of the disruptor. The man who mocked corrupt materialism is now the ultimate status symbol for billionaires. But the money is just noise. When you stand in front of a Basquiat today, you don't see an investment. You see a man who commanded the screen of history. You see the human chameleon who refused to blend in. He wasn't a primitive or a savant. He was an intellectual giant who used paint to speak a truth. He crowned himself because he knew he deserved it. He crossed out the words because he knew we needed to look closer. He ruined the Armani suits because the clothes didn't make the man. Jean-Michel Basquiat was a king of the streets. And yes, he really was that good.